On July 6th, Giantec Semiconductor quietly updated its pricing schedules and applied a 25% increase to NOR flash orders, including chips already sold but not yet delivered. If China is supposed to break the memory cartel, why is a Chinese supplier raising prices faster than the cartel ever did? One Chinese company, one invoice revision, one date that the trade press largely filed under supply chain noise. The popular hope has a real foundation. Chinese suppliers like YMTC and Cxmt have been ramping production aggressively and at prices that concerned Western incumbents enough to trigger lobbying campaigns. YMTC's 232-layer NAND was shipping at price points that, according to trade press reports and company claims, rattled Samsung and Micron's planning desks. Cxmt is scaling domestic DRAM output, per Chinese state media and analyst estimates, though no third-party yield verification has been made public. History supports the optimism structurally. Korean manufacturers undercut Japanese suppliers in the 1980s and genuinely reshaped the global market. That is established fact, not analogy. The mechanism worked once, so the bet is that it works again. New entrants with government backing flood the market. Prices fall. Incumbents lose their grip. But that answer assumes Chinese suppliers will behave like challengers fighting for market share. Giantec on July 6th did not behave like a challenger. It raised prices on goods already sold. That is not undercut behavior. That is incumbent behavior. And the hope is not wrong about the production. It is wrong about the incentive. If China is supposed to break the memory cartel, why is a Chinese supplier raising prices faster than the cartel ever did? The intermediate answer tries to contain the damage. Giantec is a NOR flash specialist serving embedded, automotive, and industrial markets, not a commodity DRAM or NAND player. Those niches are smaller and less price-sensitive than the consumer memory market. Giantec's customer base is predominantly domestic Chinese manufacturers operating under procurement localization pressure, according to industry analysts. Though granular customer data is not publicly verified, the 25% increase applied to backlog, per reported accounts, meaning buyers had no exit. They were already committed. Picture buying a plane ticket, receiving a boarding pass, and then being handed a new invoice at the gate. You can pay, or you can miss the flight. Giantec's customers were already at the gate, so the intermediate answer says, special case, unusual niche, captive buyers, not representative of the broader sector. I do not find that convincing. The mechanism that allowed Giantec to do this, which is captive domestic buyers with nowhere else to go, is exactly the mechanism localization creates in every sector it touches. As substitution pressure steers Chinese manufacturers toward Chinese suppliers, the exit option shrinks. A landlord can only raise rent freely when the tenant has no other lease to sign. The moment procurement policy closes the alternative door, not by explicit law but by cost and friction and political risk, the supplier becomes your landlord. The lock is not on the chip. It is on the door you used to leave through. So the sector-by-sector defense saves the thesis by sacrificing the mechanism. Without an exit, the buyer cannot discipline the price. Giantec is not the exception. It is the first legible example of the rule. One last time, if China is supposed to break the memory cartel, why is a Chinese supplier raising prices faster than the cartel ever did? Localization transfers supply concentration. It does not dissolve it. Imagine a town with one water utility. A drought hits, so the town builds a second reservoir, but pipes it only to the original utility. The town now has more water and exactly the same number of people controlling the tap. The reservoir did not create competition. It created a larger monopoly. China's localization push in semiconductors is policy documented. Made in China 2025, the Big Fund, and domestic procurement guidance are public record. YMTC holds the dominant share of domestic NAND supply. Cxmt leads domestic DRAM. When a domestic manufacturer cannot source from Samsung or Micron without political cost, its bargaining power against a domestic supplier drops. Reports suggest some Chinese manufacturers have absorbed component cost increases rather than risk supply disruption from switching back to foreign vendors. The sourcing on that varies, but the logic follows directly from the documented procurement structure. The cartel structure is not broken. It is rebuilt behind a different flag. And whoever is inside the new perimeter still pays the toll. I keep testing whether Giantec is an outlier or a preview. The more I look at the demand structure, which is domestic manufacturers competing for domestic output under procurement pressure, the more Giantec looks like a preview. Before the answer locks, the strongest version of the other side deserves a real hearing. If YMTC and Cxmt reach leading-edge yield at scale, and reports suggest YMTC's 232-layer performance is genuine, though no independent benchmark has confirmed it at production volumes, Chinese output could eventually create real price competition for commodity NAND and DRAM in global markets. A supplier that wants global revenue has reason to price globally. That is the bullish case, and it is not trivial. My honest read? The bullish case depends entirely on overcapacity, and overcapacity is not a business model anyone sustains on purpose. The capital required to reach the next node is enormous. Yield at leading-edge nodes is notoriously fragile. A supplier burning cash to close a technology gap does not have the margin cushion to sustain a price war. The gap to Samsung's leading memory nodes is real and documented. The timeline to close it is projection, not fact. Both sides are partly right and partly performing their preferred conclusion. The bulls are correct that capacity is growing. The bears are correct that capacity alone does not produce competitive pricing. Neither side has accounted for the variable that actually governs the outcome, which is whether domestic buyers retain a credible outside option. The question that started this was, will China break the memory cartel and lower your prices? That question had a hidden assumption buried inside it. It assumed the goal of localization was your price. It was not. The goal was supply security for China, not for you. The better question is this: when a homegrown supplier prices like the cartel it was built to replace, what exactly did localization buy? It bought independence from foreign supply disruption, and it passed the cost of that independence to whoever was left inside the new perimeter. China is building a sovereign memory stack, and that is a coherent industrial goal. Sovereign and cheap are different promises, and conflating them is how the story gets misread every time a YMTC headline appears. Giantec sent out that revised invoice on July 6th and went quiet. No press release, no explanation. The silence was the explanation. Read the localization policy backward, and the thing it was sealing in was not the chip. It was the price floor, and now it belongs to someone else. The cartel did not break. It got a new address. If you are sourcing components right now and your procurement list has shifted toward domestic Chinese suppliers under policy pressure, I want to know, have you seen the pricing behavior change? Tell me in the comments what Giantec looks like from your end of the invoice. And if this kind of read is useful, one question followed until it locks, subscribe, because that is the only format we run here.